If Ricky Ricardo were here from I Love Lucy, he'd be listening to this gospel passage. And if Jesus were here, he probably would say, Jesus, got a lot of explaining to do. We listen to this gospel passage and we're hearing about Jesus creating a division and a strife and a conflict with father and son and daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. And yet it's the same Jesus that is talking about peace. Peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. It seems rather confusing in this gospel passage that we read from Luke. First, I think it's important that we understand when Luke was written in the 80s, at that time, everybody was Jewish, and after Jesus rose from the dead, the Jewish people went back to their synagogues because that's what they knew. And as time went on, as those 30, 40 years, 50 years go by after the resurrection of Jesus, the Jewish people would be in the synagogue, and some of the people started to talk about Jesus being the Messiah, and there started to be a little bit of a separation between the Jews who only wanted to follow the law and the Torah and the Jews who were slowly starting to find there was something in the words of Jesus that was transforming their heart. So at this time when Luke is being written, the Jews are kicking the Christian Jews out of the temple. And so when Luke is writing his gospel passage, he's referring to this division and this conflict. And yet, when you look at it, you think, why is that? Why does there have to be such a conflict? Why couldn't it have just been, hey, even if you're the father and the son or whoever the relationship was, why couldn't it be that you follow the Torah, you follow all the precepts of our faith, and we acknowledge that and we respect that, but we also have this belief of Jesus. This is a new dimension to the way we see life. And so we're going to follow Jesus. Why couldn't it just be wish everybody well and go on their way? And ultimately, the fruit of any faith is that it manifests itself in love and compassion. Why the conflict? Well, I think what happens is that we have ego. Ego is that we can be identified with our body, we can be identified with things of form, the money that we have, how we look, whatever our job status is, whatever we've achieved, and we can identify and define ourselves by those things. And so often people kind of see themselves in terms of all of those things. Now, another aspect to ego is also our viewpoint, our beliefs that also can take the shape of an ego, especially an ego is always identifying with it. Now, to identify means to make the same as. So if I have a viewpoint and I am my viewpoint, then anybody who disagrees with me is disrespecting me, is dismissing me as a person for who I am, and there's no separation between who I am and my viewpoint or my belief. Now, not that I want to get into this, but you can see this happening in the world today too. We can see when it comes to Republicans and Democrats, there's such an identification with their point of view that they get into this battle of I'm right, you're wrong. It's your fault. We're blaming. Everybody's blaming the other person for all the problems that are going on in America or in the world. And it's kind of funny, in the midst of the blame game, nobody's really coming up with a creative solution. They're so busy blaming the other person. But the identification with their viewpoint creates such an anger, such a hostility. Uh, you could almost look back and think it's not that far away from the first shot that was fired at Fort Sumter in 1861 when you actually had the insanity of a civil war. Can you imagine people who were one day working as clerks or teachers or whatever they did for a living, and the next minute they have a gun in their hand and a bayonet to charge and stab another human being because they had a different viewpoint. They were not able to settle that. So you can look at ego. Ego really can get into conflict and anger and ultimately violence. The nature of ego is no matter what the achievement, no matter what, it will always end in dissatisfaction and unfulfillment. So I'd like to present this idea when you think of ourselves as human beings. So often we hear human being, it's like almost like it just comes together like peanut butter and jelly. It's just a single term. What if we were to separate the two and hear it as we have human and we have being? So that there's literally like two dimensions that make up who we are. We're human and we are being. Human is a part of our life. We have the things we have to take care of, the different necessities of life that have to be attended to. And very often the problem is we get so identified with that, it almost becomes like who we are. We get to the point where we become so identified with the dimension of human that we have lost sight of that we are a being. To practice being, to be present, the joy and the power of just being. I'd like to read something to you. The joy of being, which is the only true happiness, cannot come to you through any form, possession, achievement, person, or event, through anything that happens. That joy cannot come to you ever. It emanates from the formless dimension within you, from consciousness itself, and thus is one with who you are. We have to understand something. If we are going to experience joy and fulfillment, if we're going to experience what Jesus talked about in terms of the kingdom of God is within you, the only way we can do that, the only way we can really tap in and understand the essence of the message of Jesus is if we can practice this presence and get in touch with that we are a being as well as human. We have to be able to practice this. You can go to the gym and you could work out and you can exercise, and that's how you get into shape. You have to practice exercising. Well, how can we become more present? We have to practice presence to develop that so that we can start to see ourselves more and more in light of this. So that's what I want you to think about. Human being. You are human and you are a being. And you must integrate the two dimensions of who you are if you're going to experience fulfillment and live in the kingdom of God.